security procedures being taken at airports these days. One new measure, however, is drawing bitter criticism, especially from Islamic groups. And that's the kind of apparent racial profiling that had a Secret Service agent taken off of an American Airlines flight on Christmas Day. The agent is of Arab descent. He's part of the president's security detail, and he was carrying his service weapon on his way from Washington to Crawford, Texas, where he was going to guard Mr. Bush. American Airlines says there was a discrepancy in the paperwork. The agent needed to carry his gun on board. But Islamic groups say this is another of 160 complaints filed by Arab Americans who say they've been targeted because of their ethnic heritage. Joining us in Washington is Hussein Ibish of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, the ADC, and in Denver tonight, Michael Boyd, an aviation analyst and president of the Boyd Group, an aviation consulting firm. Mr. Boyd, I'd like to start with you, and forgive me for being as blunt about this, but the enemy, as I see it here, and I think if we don't call it an enemy, then I think we're just being stupid. The enemy is radical Islamic terror. They're the only ones that I know to date that have shown a predilection to blowing themselves up and taking the rest of us with them. Why should we be screening, for instance, women who Islamic radicals regard as second class and unworthy of martyrdom? Aren't we just being dumb?
Well, let's be real blunt here. You bring up a very good point. One of the things we're doing by just screening people who look like they're from the Middle East is we're thinking that the next threat's going to come from the Middle East. One of the problems we've got here is, look, it did come from the Middle East. We've got to take that into consideration. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's racial, but if it's just screening everybody who just happens to look Islamic, that's wrong. But you're right, it does come from a certain area of the world, and you have to look at that as one and only one factor. But what we're doing,
but Mr. Boyd, you represent the moderate side of versus, I guess, where I'm coming down is on the extreme side here. But what I'm saying, and in no uncertain terms, I am saying this so that it's understood that only one branch of one religion advocates death as the way to preserve life. And that religion is radical Islam.
Of course, that's not true at all. I mean, there are many...
What are the other religions? I'd love to know.
Wait.
Correct me. The Old Testament, the New Testament, they are both against that.
No, I mean, we've had so many killers throughout the years, including Timothy McVeigh, who believes he's a Christian martyr, and so many murderers throughout the years who cite Jewish texts, Christian texts. I mean, really, all religions have been twisted. And if you think that the only threat to security in the United States comes from radical Muslims, you're forgetting the past 10 years of history. You're forgetting about Tim McVeigh. You're forgetting about Eric Rudolph,
I guess maybe I'm just
who was a Christian, right?
More closely.
Right, of course you are. But then think about what's happened in this country since September 11th. 3 major incidents of domestic terrorism. The anthrax thing, which almost certainly does not come from Arabs or Muslims in the view of law enforcement.
The anthrax killer took pains to not kill himself. I'm talking about suicide as a method to get to heaven.
Look, the point is who's posing a threat. Okay, that's the point. The point is who is a threat to security. The second major instance of domestic terrorism, the JDL guys, Irv Rubin and his nutty fellow who wanted to blow up the congressman in California. The third, this guy Reed, who is half Jamaican and half British, who can't fit any profile.
I think the point's very obvious.
If I could, let me just, Michael Boyd, let me just come in. Let me just come in. All right.
Sure.
First of all, Mr. Ibish, welcome to our show. We appreciate your responses. We may disagree here, but we never disrespect. Couple of points I want to make briefly. First of all, I think the Reed incident was a French fiasco. And I think the onus and blame has to be on the French authorities. And they're eating crow now, and hopefully they're going to do something about it. But insofar as this country is concerned, you know, I go back and forth. I'm on the shuttle between New York and Washington. It seems to me almost every time I'm on, I get the S on my card, which means my bag and I get rechecked again by the gate. It's very difficult, but you know what? I do it because we're fighting a war, and so I do it. Now, my point to you is this. If, at least in the first 6 to 12 months, before we get our security system up and going and apply the right technologies and so forth and so on, if there is some intelligence and information gathering about passengers, if there is some extra effort maintained either at the security gate or at the desk itself before you go on, so what? Isn't this a small price to pay? And by the way, as I'm sure you know, poll after poll shows the vast majority, 80 to 90% of the American public, wants this kind of scrutiny.
Of course. Now, obviously, you're right. We need extra security, and no one objects to it. I fly around a lot, too, and obviously the security is tighter now than it was. It probably needs to be tighter still. The question is, how are you going to direct limited law enforcement resources? And if you're going to use ethnicity as the principal marker of suspicion, I maintain, and so do a lot of law enforcement and counterterrorism experts, including Vincent Carostraro, the former head of CIA counterterrorism, that you're going to be wasting valuable resources, that in fact ethnicity is a false lead. We need real security that protects us against all kinds of different threats that come from all kinds of different nuts. And
okay, Mr. Ibish,
that's a valid point.
Mr. Ibish, if a majority of the hijackers came from Saudi Arabia,
they did.
Should we red flag Saudi Arabians?
I think that would be a mistake, frankly. I mean, I really don't think it'll end up giving you more security. We've had a profiling system in airports in place since 1996. It hasn't resulted in the identification of anyone that we can tell who actually posed a threat. And with the profiling that's going on now, no one appears to have been apprehended. What you've got is profiling of Secret Service agents and Daralisa, the congressman. And
wait a minute.
I don't know.
Gentlemen, we got to take a break here. We're going to come back to the same issue, more of our debate on airport profiling when we return. If you don't stay with us, you're crazy.